When artists start their career, majority of them have the common goal of getting signed by a record label. Now, getting signed definitely has its pros and cons. We've seen in the music industry countless of times artists getting screwed over by their label. However, I do think there is a place for record labels in the industry, as booking tours, distributing physical media, and promotion would be extremely difficult to balance out on top of releasing music for these artists. I'm sure you've heard of the big three when it comes to these labels, that being Warner Music Group, Sony Music Entertainment, and Universal Music Group. It really does suck that we have such a monopoly when it comes to this. As you know, the higher-ups of these labels don't give a shit about the music, only about pleasing the shareholders. But before I go on a tangent about all the negative things these big companies have done, I'm going to instead talk about my favorite, and probably some equally shitty, record labels in music. I guess we'll start with what is one of the most beloved record labels, and also one of the most stacked lineup of artists, Warp Records. Warp actually started as an indie record shop in 1987, all the way in Sheffield, with the owners being Steve Beckett and Rob Mitchell. In 1989, they transitioned into becoming a record label with the help of Robert Gordon, who at the time was part of the bleep techno band Forge Masters. Since he was now a co-founder, it was a no-brainer to have Warp's first official release be from the Forge Masters. From 1989 to 1993, Warp Records were pumping out mainly bleep techno, acid house, and Detroit house music, with the occasional other house subgenres here and there. Warp found some early success, as the bleep techno track, Dexterous by Nightmare on Wax, rose up onto the UK Top 100 chart, and it even got into the top 40. Warp Records was off to a hot start, and this was only the beginning, as not even 6 months later, LFO's self-titled single charted in the top 20. With these two hits, Warp had now gotten the exposure they needed to sign more artists and continue their success. Warp absolutely knocked it out the park with their new signings and made a record label-based album featuring a few of these new signings. It had the likes of Speedy J, Autechre, Musicology, and the Dice Man? Well, the Dice Man is arguably Warp Records' most iconic member of their roster in Aphex Twin. I think this past Artificial Intelligence album is where we get to see prime Warp Records, with the releases being from 1993 to the 2000s being so good. You had releases like Aphex Twin's extremely underrated album in Surfing on the Sine Waves, his legendary follow-up to Saw Volume 1 with a more actual traditional ambient feel. But that being said, nothing Richard makes is ever traditional, and Sawtooth has so many layers of sound. It's probably the most maximalist ambient album ever. We get a few more Aphex Twin albums throughout this period of time, with I Care Because You Do, Richard D. James, and a few solid EPs. Also in this era, we see Autechre with their debut album, Incunabula, which showcased their classic IDM style. The album goes a bit in every direction, as one moment they go for a slow and relaxing track, only to switch it up into a high energy display of their technical abilities. As for their second album, in Amber, they opted for a way more colder vibe. Amber kept things simple, being focused on the more ambient techno side of things. They were going to release their most iconic album in 1995 in Try Repete, and if you're looking to get into IDM, I think this is the album you should listen to. This is like just pure IDM technical brilliance. It is amazing. Nightmare on Wax dropped their magnum opus in Smoker's Delight, which sees their sound shift into trip-hop, fusing R&B and funk elements to create a very psychedelic feel. Squarepusher dropped Hard Normal Daddy, and Music Is Rotted One Note, both albums having awesome sampling, and they combined countless genres to create this unique soundscape that at the time, no one else on Warp Records was doing. I don't think it's crazy to say that Warp Records is one of the most cutting-edge labels ever, and have always been pushing the boundary when it comes to sound, no matter what genre. And I think an artist that just proves this is Boards of Canada. They've always been so creative how they do the rollouts for their albums, and even in their albums, there's just so many Easter eggs. But their debut album, Music Has the Right to Children, just mixes ambient and IDM perfectly. It has such a soothing and nostalgic vibe, and I feel like no matter what generation you're from, you're just going to be feeling that. Truly timeless stuff. I think it's also interesting how many people consider Boards of Canada's music to be creepy. Even this album, which I think is extremely comforting, a lot of people just have this off-settling vibe about it. But yeah, this little period of time between 1993 and 2000 is where Warp really came to prominence and released so much good stuff. Obviously, Warp continued to sign great artists like Danny Brown, One Tricks Point Never, Eve's Tumor, Flying Lotus, and so many more. And that's not to say that the artists from 1993 to 2000s dropped bad music or anything. They continued their legendary run, but I just think that early era was slightly better. Now, the next label I want to talk about is one that ended before it could even get started, and it was all due to a horrible tragedy. Hippos and Tanks was founded by Travis Willie and Baron Machat, the son of the legendary Stephen Machat. The two bonded over their love for music and had their humble beginnings as a radio show host between the 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. spot. They finally launched a label in 2010 and became a hub for the hypnagogic pop and more avant-garde style of music. They saw potential in artists like Daniel Lopatin, Grimes, Dean Blunt, Young Lean, and so many iconic releases came from this small time frame. From Dean Blunt, we got the Narcissist 2, the Redeemer, and a Hype Williams release. However, Dean is not a fan of this label, as he claims Hippos and Tanks were the devil, and they had him and Ferraro up to DJ at these weird rich people parties. Apparently, the rich people were chasing women around the forest, which is just so weird. He also had a major lawsuit with him regarding his contract, and the label that Dean signed to after them had to pay a hefty $10,000 fine to get him out of his old contract. From James Ferraro, we got the brutally honest release of New York Hell 3 AM that dives into the horrible life that New Yorkers live. The greatest prediction of all time, that being Farside Virtual, was the showcase for our current society's dumb obsessions with the likes of AI, Dubai, and corporations. We also got NYC Hell's predecessor in Cold, the Condo Pets EP, and also Watch the Throne 1 and 2, which is a collaboration between him and Dean Blunt, which was pretty cool. As for Daniel Lopatin, he only released one project under the label, that being the EP under the alias of Games. It's actually super underrated, and I wish more people would talk about it, as the whole EP is just filled with bangers. Now, I mentioned Young Lean earlier, and whilst he never released any material for them, Baron was actually his manager for the USA tours, and he was close with the Sad Boys and Drain Gang as he helped them go on tour and make Young Lean's album in the USA. I'm sure you guys know about the tragic story of what happened in Miami. A combination of unholy amounts of drugs, an insane amount of fame way too fast, and overall irresponsibility. It first started off with a Black Marble tour as Sad Boys and Blade and their manager Emilio went across America touring with Baron, helping them out. They were doing a crazy amount of shows, and once the tour was complete, Lean didn't want to go back to Sweden. Instead, he went to Miami to start recording Warlord. Emilio, Young Good, and Sherman all went back to Sweden as they needed a break. This left the 18-year-old Young Lean, 21-year-old Blade, and Baron Machat, who was only still 27, all alone. According to Blade, absolutely nothing was getting done in the studio, but just drugs. All this culminated when Young Lean had a full mental breakdown and went into psychosis. He destroyed the apartment Baron had provided for them, which led to Blade calling the authorities, and all while this was happening, Baron was driving under the influence while being completely gone off Xans. This resulted in a fatal car accident. This story is just so sad, and it still hurts to read about it to this day, but Young Lean has thankfully made a full recovery since the incident. Year One was a key factor in getting Young Lean back into music after this incident. And although they've had their controversies, it's not hard to have this label up there as one of my favourites. The entirety of Sad Boys and Drain Gang all signed to Year 01 back in 2016 alongside DG and SBE affiliate A Damn Killer. One thing I really rate about this label and Emilio was their willingness to let the boys experiment on different projects not under the label. Jonathan Lean Dior 96 was Lean's attempt of getting back into music at his own pace, and props to those at Year 1 for letting him do this instead of rushing him back and making him tour and making music. Another case of this was when Blade wanted to release Ice Dancer independently, and Year One was more than happy to allow it to happen. Also, Tyboy Digital's DJ Billy Bull, alias that he performs under. Most labels were really strict with their artists' creativity, but Year One allowed all of them to try new things, even if it wasn't directly under the label. But now, we must address the elephant in the room, and that being that Emilio is funny with some money. The signs of this showed extremely early as the Damn Killer went on the Warlord tour and opened up for Lean. The tour went great, so Emilio said he could manage Adam when he came to any business within Europe. Now, a bit of backstory here. Young Lean had convinced Adam to drop out of college to go on this tour, and just before the tour, Adam got kicked out of his mum's house with very little money to his name. so this was a huge opportunity to make money and gain some traction for Adam. He was originally owed 14 grand after the tour, which would have been amazing for Adam, but somehow that 14k got turned into only 3k. Lean had invited Adam to come hang out with all of them in Europe for a couple weeks, and Adam even headlined his own show in Sweden. At the same time, he was using Emilio's studio, and unbeknownst to Adam, Emilio was charging him the entire time, whilst claiming it was all good that he could record. They also charged him for rides to the airport, which is insane, next level petty. But the craziest part about Adam getting charged for the studio was the fact that he didn't get any of the songs that he tried to record there. Adam had claimed he recorded an entire tape, plus a few tracks with Young Lean, and he never got to see any of them. This was so shitty of something to happen to a young kid. And fast forward to 2023, and Young Lean, Sherman, Good, Blade, Tyboy, Echo, and White Armor have all gotten out of their contract, and whilst details haven't fully been released, you can imagine it had to do a lot with money. And I remember Adam saying one time that Blade also didn't get paid for tours, and he was getting sent free clothes instead of actual money, which I don't know how true this is, but you never know. Now, onto a label that has not only great music, but one of the best reputations a label could ever have. That being 100% Electronica. Run by George Clanton and Negative Gemini, 100% Electronica has been such an important staple within the vaporwave scene. They've produced physicals for the likes of Surfing, Satin Sheets, Equip, FM Skyline, Windows 96, Vapora, and Death Dynamic Shroud. 100% Electronica has also experimented in countless different ways to showcase their artists. 100% Electronica did these virtual reality based concerts known as Virtual Utopia, and it was such a cool concept back in 2020 and 2021. It featured a lot of their artists, but also non-signed artists like Magdalena Bay and Kite System Corp. After this, they continued to further experiment with VR concerts with their VR Big Stream, debuting around 2020, but only becoming a weekly series in 2022. They had artists like TV Girl, Frost Children, and Full Body 2 perform on these streams. Also YouTuber Pad Chennington, shout out to him. But ultimately, I think the labels, George's, and Negative Gemini's biggest accomplishment was Electronicon. Bringing the vaporwave to live format was a crazy risk, and managing to get 4 amazing festivals out of it is so impressive. This is why I consider George to be the most influential figure in vaporwave, as bringing the solely internet-based genre out for not even just one concert, but a whole festival is amazing. George had helped countless of the artists who attended perform live for the first time with visuals, stage presence, and overall setting up the festival. The lineups of these festivals make me so devastated that I never got to go to one, and considering the fact that George has moved entirely away from vaporwave, I'll probably never get to go to one anyway. The first show in 2019 featured names like Christ, Nimesh, Golden Living Room, Vapora, Telepath, the Televape Performance, DDS, Saint Pepsi, and obviously Clanton and Negative Gemini as well. Electronicon 2 had mainly the same core, but added a few names like Internet Club, Frank FC, and Cat System Corp. Electronicon 3 had TV Girl, Frost Children, Hotel Pools, Desert Sand Fields, Warm at Night, Yunwa, Groceries, Luxury Elite, and Neon Indian. And finally, the last Electronicon had an even more stacked lineup with James Ferraro, Full Body 2, Architecture in Tokyo, 18 Carat Affair, and RXK Nephew. I wonder if Ferraro and RXK Nephew met at that festival. But yeah, I can't say enough how important these festivals were for Vaporwave, as now countless Vaporwave festivals are carrying the legacy of Electronicon. Festivals like Flamingo Fest, presented by Utopia District and My Pet Flamingo, Summer Slushy, ran by Pad Chennington, Geometric Lullaby, and the Slushwave Festival, hosted by Desert Sand Fields Warms at Night and Vapor Memory. I also want to quickly just do some shout outs to some other labels that I can't go too in depth with, otherwise this video will just go on forever. Geometric Lullaby being the home for Vaporwave physical releases with the likes of Telepath, 18 Days, Desert Sand Fields Warm at Night, Hantazai, Mindspring Memories, and their very own ARG that they created with Begotten. Also Dismiss Yourself, with them being really popular on YouTube and working with so many great artists like High C, Cartier God, Bliss33, Sienna Sleep, Yabujin, and SGP. A more recent record label in Dead Air Records with the likes of Nina Geraci, Jane Remover, Bystorm, Quantic, Days God, Lucy Bedrock, Kuru, and Quinn. So stacked. Now the last record label I'm going to talk about is Stone Throw Records, who are one of the best boom bap labels ever. Started by Chris Manak, who who was a boom bap artist himself under the name Peanut Butter Wolf, it was clear he had the passion for it, as he'd been releasing music since the late 80s. He started the label as a way to release the collaborations between him and his friend Charisma, who unfortunately passed away in a shooting at the young age of 20. Chris released the tracks together and soon after would be releasing physicals for the rap group Lupac, and released their iconic sound pieces The Antidote on vinyl for both studio version and instrumental. Since he had that connection with Madlib for releasing with Lupac, he would then go on to release the Unseen vinyl by Quasimodo. But Madlib isn't the only iconic producer he would work with, as the collab between him and Jay Dilla and Champion Sounds got released on physicals. The connection with Madlib would go on to pay off even further, as one of the most beloved hip-hop albums ever would be pressed on vinyl for Chris's label, that being Mad Villainy by MF Doom. But this isn't where the success would stop for the label, as only a few years later did they do another one of hip-hop's dearly most loved albums in Donuts. This meant a lot to Chris, as he and Dilla were very close, and in 2005 he held an early version of the album as him and a more healthy Jay Dilla rode around the city. He instantly knew he had to get this beautiful work of art for his label, and of course, Jay Dilla was happy to let him do so. The label released Donuts 3 days before Jay's passing. After this, the label slowed down big releases, as Chris said Donuts and the death of his close friend made him want to experiment more with the label and not focus on a mainstream appeal. In 2010s, he would still do the occasional boom bap releases, working with the likes of Freddie Gibbs, Guilty Simpson, and Samiyun, and also Quasimodo again for a few compilation releases. But the label went in all sorts of different directions when it came to genres. They would work with the likes of Sedan Archives, Mile High Club, and even Fortet. Even though So & So Records don't work with as much boom bap artists anymore, their legacy in hip-hop is cemented as one of the greatest labels of all time. I hope you guys enjoyed that video. Research about all these labels is super fun, and there's plenty more out there, so if you guys want a part 2, let me know. Thanks for watching the video. Make sure to subscribe, like, join the Discord, follow my RYM, and TikTok.